Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 189th Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our televised discussions twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political dialogue. Today, our panel will discuss white supremacy. To what extent does it exist, and does it pose a threat to the progress of non-whites? Today's panel includes Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services, Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist, Joe Gaines, former faculty member of the University of Akron, and Patty Haskins, member of the Wadsworth City Council. Bryan, there's no doubt that many white people believed that they were part of a superior race and deserved to dominate all others, and in fact did so during much of the history of the United States. Since all racial and gender discrimination was outlawed in 1964, to what extent do you think the belief in white superiority stands in the way of the progress of non-whites?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I've been reading a lot of Thomas Sowell. Now, he's not a very popular person on the extreme left, especially amongst the extreme Black leftists, because over his career, if you know anything about Thomas Sowell, he's a Harvard-educated PhD economics, trained person. He's written a lot about the Black race, about slavery, about economics and how it affects them. And he touches on some of the issues that I think maybe can, there you go. That's a great read. I would recommend that to anyone, Black rednecks and white liberals. And, this notion of white supremacy, I would think maybe 100, 150 years ago, prior to all the civil rights activity that went on in the 60s, probably was an issue. But with affirmative action, preference-based hiring, all the different programs that have given people of color a leg up, I find it hard to make the argument that white supremacy is maybe in pockets, but not widely experienced by people of color. Now, obviously, I'm not Black. I'm about as white as they come. And my experience growing up, and I've touched on this, was in the 60s and 70s, they started to integrate the military branches of service. My father was in the Army, made it a career, and we had all different colors of friends and all different colors of people that were in authority. Colin Powell, who just passed away, came up through the military. And I would, they did a good job of integrating and putting all different types of people together. There were Blacks, Asians, Filipinos, Germans. Mrs. Harris down the hall in the apartment that we lived in when my dad was stationed in Germany was a white German. She was married to Sergeant Harris, who was a great guy. He was Black. He'd been in the military, 18 years. He had, he was a great guy. There was the Filipino lady married to the master sergeant who was Hispanic, Sergeant Gonzalez. So I guess, I experienced that growing up, that I never really felt that I was superior than anybody else. I don't think I've ever experienced the feeling that somehow, because of my color, I'm better than someone else. It was always on merit. And you achieved your station in life. The things that you achieved were on merit, not because of your color. Now, I'm not saying that some of these attitudes didn't exist, and maybe they do continue to exist in certain places, but I think with just everything that's gone on over the last 50 years, I find it hard to make a case that somehow there are white supremacists out there that are keeping people down, that the man, that man or they are keeping people down. And with some of the stuff that Thomas Sowell has written about, it's pretty clear that the data supports his theories and his thesis that it's really, you're only keeping yourself down. There's plenty of opportunities, and he doesn't sidestep the issues of slavery and those things that this country went through, but he provides context to those particular issues. He doesn't downplay it. So today, I really struggle with the notion that somehow white supremacy is keeping people down, people of color down from achieving and finding the types of fulfillment that they're looking for. So I could be all wet. Like I said, I'm as white as they come. And I have not had that experience of being a person of color, but you hate to say that you had friends that are people of color and you see them and you see their achievements. But I think my experience growing up gave me a pretty good insight into, folks that are Black, Asian, Hispanic, you name it. It was the spectrum of people. And we always judge people by their merits, not by the color of their skin, but it was the rank on their sleeve. So.
Okay, hopefully before we're done today, we can circle around and ask you something about your Mormon experience.
Sure.
But Ron, where do you come from? I think I have an idea.
The whole concept of race bothers me scientifically because, we're like dogs. It doesn't matter what color we are, or how big we are, we're all the same race. There's no such, we have differences in skin pigment and so on. Once we moved out of Africa, we lost the melanin in our skin and all that. So that doesn't make us superior. You certainly see white supremacy being expressed. Look at all the Confederate battle flags you see flying around. Those are still with us. I saw a truck the other day with two of them on the back of the pickup truck flying boldly down the street. But yeah, Brian, I agree with you. Now, when I grew up in an almost all white community, there were a few Black families. They'd been there since the Civil War. I didn't know any of them. Undergraduate school, there were still very few folks of any mixed background there. When I got to graduate school, it was a different thing. And we had Indians and Filipinos and a couple of Black people. And so I agree with you. It turns out to be a series of merit. I'm certainly superior to a bunch of people and inferior to a whole lot more. So, but that's my accomplishments. It's not my race. It's not my skin color. And it bothers me to see that there is still some of that around. What do you know? Where was it? Charlotte, where they had the big rally and somebody ran their car through the crowd, killed a person. So is that attitude is out there. I hope that it's getting less. I agree with Bryan. Since the civil rights movement, the opportunities are much more there for folks. As far as advantages of being white, they're cultural if they're there at all. We were talking earlier before we started about Christian values, Judeo-Christian values, and yeah, they're strong, but they're strong in other cultures as well. And I just don't see that white supremacy as a big problem, but I think it exists and it's still here, and we need to keep working at it, and both in our own attitudes, our unconscious attitudes, our ways that society is operating, and what we can do to observe and to have our own small bit on trying to change that for the better. So There you go.
Joe, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with Ron 100% in the sense that I think that even though we don't want to admit white supremacy, there's an element out there that really still believes in it and will do anything to bring it out. I grew up in a situation where I lived in a neighborhood that was all mixed, and then we moved out in the country and it was all white. My father was very poor and economically just didn't have a lot of background in education or anything like that. But he was also very smart in the sense that he knew that people were equal. And he told me as a kid, he said, no one's better than you, but you're not better than anybody else either. And I grew up with that belief. I still have that. White supremacy is there. It's not just in the South, it's here in the Wadsworth area to some degree. You can see it on the back of trucks, like he said. You can see it in different ways, but we've got to keep fighting it.
Mhm. Patty, do you think that the feelings of white supremacy on the part of some people and the trucks that Joe sees are really holding Black people down? No, we don't have your audio, Patty.
Yes. In some ways, I don't know that it directly affects everyone, but the fact that white supremacy does exist, and no matter how large or small, is still a problem and needs to be dealt with. I read an interesting article this past week from Forbes. It was published this year about the 4 major misconceptions about white supremacy. And the first one was that it was always intentional. There's a lot of white supremacy that occurs and people don't even realize that is occurring. You mentioned that since '64 things have gotten better, yet we still have situations such as redlining. We have housing discrimination still. We have situations where legislatures are making it more difficult for Blacks to vote or are gerrymandering districts so as to disenfranchise certain Black voters. The second misconception they mentioned that it is only upheld by white people. There are people of color that also discriminate as well, depending upon the darkness of your skin. And that unfortunately, this stems from the fact that the desirable appearance is of that white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed person. And the closer you can become to that particular norm makes you a superior person. The third thing you mentioned, I thought this was really interesting, is the misconception that white supremacy is not all that common. And it actually is very common. And, one thing many people point to, they say, well, in people that are older in their time, certain types of discrimination were considered acceptable, but people have grown and younger people are not as bad as olders are. And that's not necessarily the case. One of the things that we have found, and one of the it is attributed to, is the fact that we have the internet now, so that there is much more opportunity for white supremacists to spread conspiracy theories, to spread lies, and to recruit and organize those that would be like-minded with them. The fourth misconception that was mentioned is that white supremacy has disappeared with new leadership. And it is always pointed to, well, President Obama was Black, so white supremacy does not exist anymore. And which is completely the opposite of the truth. It's a fact that the growth of white supremacist groups increased by a large amount during the presidency of Obama. Perhaps it was those that were fearful of Blacks taking over the country. Perhaps it was just due to the fact that they just didn't want to see that happen again. I don't know, but that is occurring. The internet, as I said, has a great deal to do with this. I think it's difficult to compare, white supremacy of today as 200 years ago. They are different, but it is still showing itself. I think, Ron mentioned, the Charlottesville, where, hundreds of people gathered and were seen marching down the street saying Jews will not replace us. And, carrying the tiki torches. That was scary to see. People are more open about it. I've seen more racial tension. The mass killings that we've had, whether it be in a Black Baptist church or whether it be in a Jewish synagogue, have tended to increase. And it's almost become an accepted practice that we see this, we'll deal with it for a few days and then we move on. It's difficult, and it's a difficult topic to actually counteract in order to eliminate white supremacy. We have to change the hearts and the minds of people. And you need to do that with education and with reading and having serious dialogue about these problems. To say that, well, it's getting better and everybody's okay is never going to solve the situation. We need to keep it open and have open discussions about this and the effects that white supremacy has upon the country and our people.
Isn't it true, though, that nearly every nationality and race has some sort of a feeling of superiority about themselves?
Is it superiority, or is it just that they're happy to be who they are and pride in who they are? I come from an Italian background, and I don't think we ever thought of ourselves as superior, but we were proud of being, Italian.
Tell that to the Irish and
Yeah.
on the East Coast in the 1800s. I think that any and you're right, John, there have been many cases where various different groups of ethnicities were discriminated against, but then they managed to find some other group that they thought was less than them. And rather than not discriminate, they continue to discriminate. So you have this chain going down of, well, at least I'm better than the Irish, or at least I'm better than the Chinese, or whatever. And I don't know if that's part of human nature, but it has been a part of our history.
When I grew up, we felt that we were better than the people who lived in West Virginia.
Well,
What side of the river you lived on?
Yeah.
yeah.
It's sad, but true.
Yeah.
What about Afrocentrism? All of the things that the Afrocentric people like to attribute to themselves, like being the original, like Ron pointed out, I believe it was Ron, that they are the original people. Everybody else came out of Africans and other. It just seems to me that I've known people of different nationalities that they were just outraged at the very idea that daughters would marry somebody who wasn't Greek, or So
I think if you go back in anyone, if you've been doing any sort of DNA stuff, everybody's got a little bit of everything. We're all Heinz 57 mutts,
Exactly.
I mean, for the longest time, my parents always thought we were from Germany, Pennsylvania Dutch, the folks up there in Western Pennsylvania, Zelienople and all that stuff. And it was Laubaugh and all that kind of stuff. So you do a DNA thing. I've got more Italian and more English in me than I do German, and we never had a lot of spaghetti sauce or, I mean, there wasn't anything like that in our house. But
my people all came from Germany and France, and my mother, or my wife's mother's maiden name was Murphy, and I always kidded her about her Irish background. Well, we did the DNA thing and found out I'm more Irish than she is.
Yeah,
But
crazy.
anyway, Brian, I know that you're too young to have experienced all of the discrimination against Latter-day Saints being pushed across the country and so forth. But what kind of legacy has that left with you in this modern era?
Yeah, I think as a culture and as a people, we're much more tolerant because of just some of the things that have happened. You know, I think we're the only group of people that ever had a actual extermination order. The Missouri governor, and it wasn't until maybe 5 or 6 years ago that the governor decided that, hey, you know what, maybe we should let that thing expire. But so I think there's just a feeling that you want to accept people and no matter what their beliefs are, and try to be open and understanding what they're feeling, but still have principles in your life, and do your best to be the best person that you can be and grow where you're planted, so to speak. So yeah, I don't ever recall, other than in history class, when the history teacher would get to the chapter on the pioneers, and they always brought up about Brigham Young and his 27 wives. And they always asked, Brian, does your dad have multiple wives? And I'd say, nope, he can barely handle the one he's got. So no, we don't have, we don't practice polygamy or anything like that anymore. But that was the only time that I ever felt like the spotlight was on me, was in history class, talking about the Pilgrims and the pioneers heading out west and the Mormon Trail and all that kind of stuff. So,
Brian, wasn't the fact that Mitt Romney was a Mormon, wasn't that brought up as a negative towards him when he ran for president? I seem to recall that.
Yeah.
I don't know that it was a general feeling, but I did hear that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Mitt Romney comes from a long line of polygamists. And when the when the United States said for the Utah to become a state, they would have to disavow and stop practicing polygamy, Mitt's family went to Mexico. And, basically they continued down in the colonies. Maybe people don't realize that, but there's a lot of members of our faith that live south of the border in the colonies. Now, they don't practice polygamy anymore, but Mitt Romney's family headed south, went out of the country, continued to practice for some time, but they no longer practice polygamy. There are some kind of fundamentalist groups that do, but it's not it's not something that we do anymore. But Mitt Romney does come from a pretty good long line of polygamists. So, but he just has one wife, and he did put his dog on the roof.
He what?
Put his dog on the roof of the car.
That was one of the big brouhahas, that he put his dog on the top of the roof of the kennel when they traveled across the country. So, okay, yeah.
I got it. Well, one other point that I'd like to address, I was reading, in fact, I think it was something by Thomas Sewell talking about the critical race theory, and indicating that part of critical race theory is to reject all things white. And the idea that things like punctuality and commitment and honesty and planning and hard work are white cultural characteristics and are to be rejected at all costs by Blacks. Have you heard anything like that?
No, never.
Just reverse.
Exactly. No.
I think
Really?
it's a great, if you I find it very enlightening, his writing and his perspective on things, and I recommend his writings to anyone that's really interested in really seeing some of the root causes, and he's not afraid to take those issues on. with cold hard facts. So,
And he is pretty much a database person, being an economist.
yeah,
His opinions are usually based on recorded fact.
yeah.
and
Yeah.
so forth.
Now, one thing that he does bring up, and Patty touched on this, is a lot of folks in the Black community, they don't like West Africans. You know, those folks that have multiple jobs, they work hard, they came here, maybe they're first generation West Africans, they immigrated here, and he points out that it only took them like 10 or 11 years to improve their station in life and pass up a lot of other groups. He looks at immigrants and how long it takes them to achieve that American dream that people really strive for. But yeah, there's a real, talk about, a bias against some of those folks. I mean, he points that out a lot in some of his writing. So.
Yeah, but I suppose at some point we ought to discuss the Black culture and how it got formed in the South, with the cultural characteristics of the ancestors of the white Southerners and the impact that they had on Black culture. And that should be kind of an interesting topic, I believe.
A lot of those folks were from England and Scotland, down through there. My wife's family were Sullivans. They were Scots who came over and went down there through the Appalachian chain and settled in South Carolina. And there are a lot of folks from that ethnic background.
Yeah, I think we had to get into that, but unfortunately our time is up for today. So thank you very much for another good program.
Take care.
Bye.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.